Right, we have already defined what inheritance is. This is just a recap of what we covered in our previous lectures. So by definition, we are saying inheritance is just a reusability mechanism because it allows us to reuse existing code, right? When we looked at class diagrams, I indicated that when you design your class diagrams, you need to factor out maybe a common functionality, and then you add it to the super classes. Then the subclasses will inherit that functionality without having to redefine the functionality in the subclasses, right? So that allows us to reuse existing functionality. Right, so we are saying it's a reusability mechanism in object-oriented programming in which the common properties, right, of various objects are exploited to form relationships with each other. The abstract and common properties are provided in the superclass, which is available to more specialized subclasses. For example, a color print and a black and a white print are kinds of printer. This is just a repetition of what we covered in one of our lessons. Right, when we say that class B is inherited from class A, then class B is referred to as a derived class or a subclass or even a child class. And A is called a base class, a superclass, or a parent class. And by inheritance, the derived class receives the behavior, right? As long as that behavior is what is public, right? Or even protected, and even default, it will actually receive that behavior, such that all the visible member methods and variables of the base class are available in the derived class. Apart from the inherited behavior, the derived class specializes, or it will actually add its own unique features. Right, so we are saying inheritance is a powerful feature that allows new classes to be derived from existing ones. Right, so you are sort of extending your classes. The derived class inherits the interface of the base class and can add new methods or change the existing ones or override the ones which are in the superclasses. Any number of classes can be added to the inheritance scheme to come up with an inheritance hierarchy. Right. The Java implementation of inheritance supports polymorphism. It supports polymorphism, and we actually indicated that we have got two types of polymorphism. Which are the types of polymorphisms? Polymorphism. Right, we have got static and dynamic polymorphism, and we indicated that if it is static, it actually takes place during compilation time. And it is also known as overloading. And if it is dynamic, it takes place during runtime, and it is called overriding. Right, so when you are overloading, in most cases, you define two or more methods with the same method name but different formal parameters. You can define maybe a method called add. Maybe the first one, it takes two, maybe a floating point arguments. Then maybe you define another method also called add. Then maybe it takes maybe a string and an integer. So if these two methods are defined in one class, that is called static polymorphism, or it's called overloading. But if you now have an inheritance hierarchy or some superclasses and subclasses, right? And then you have maybe the same method or the method with the same name appearing in both the superclass and the subclass, it then becomes overriding, and that's dynamic binding. Right, so it is called static polymorphism in the sense that the binding or association of the method interface to the implementation takes place during what? During compilation time. If I can maybe just go to that employee class, right? In this employee class, I have got this constructor, right? This constructor is actually what? It is actually overloaded. We have got a constructor with the same what? Same name but different arguments. Same name but different arguments. So we are saying this is an example of what? Of overloading methods. We are overloading methods here. And we are saying that is called static polymorphism, which means that the decision to bind, right? If we come to this test bed and then we say employee, like new employee like that, right? We need to bind or associate this constructor that we are calling with its implementation. We need to bind or associate this constructor that we are invoking with its actual what? Implementation, which is here, right? So we are saying that decision to bind the interface of a method to its actual implementation, it takes place during what? During compilation time. It takes place during compilation time, right? It will just check maybe the arguments and then use that information that if we say maybe employee like that, then we pass two arguments, one being a string and another one being a floating point number. It will just go and check during compilation time. It will just go and check which of the constructors has been defined in such a way that it takes two arguments, the first one being a string, then the second one being a double. And then it will implement that, or it will then maybe call and run that particular constructor or method. But if it is now overriding, we are saying maybe we have got this employee class, then that employee class has some subclasses. That employee class has some subclasses, right? And then maybe you define a method with the same name in their superclass and subclass, and then maybe modify its functionality from the subclass, right? So if you now have such a situation, it is now called overriding. The methods which are in the subclass will override the methods which are in the superclass, right? And so when we create an object, this is what we are about to look at. If we create an object like maybe employee, right? If we create an employee object from this test bed, like maybe E1 and so on, right? If we say E dot, then we try to call a particular method. It will try to search for the method within this file, the employee. If it doesn't find the method, it will go up the inheritance hierarchy and then try to check from the immediate parent of employee if it has any superclass, right? So if there is an implementation of a method, it will just invoke that method. It will invoke that particular method. So we are saying that decision to call the appropriate method or to bind a method to the interface, it takes place during runtime. That's why it is called dynamic polymorphism. Right. So what we want to do today is we want to add one attribute to this class that we are you've already defined, and I would like to believe that you have defined this employee class. If you haven't, make sure that you define the class, because we shall be using it in future. Right, so what we want to do is that we want to introduce another attribute, but this is now sort of an object. This is now sort of an object. So we are going to what? We are going to introduce an attribute but the attribute is what? Is actually an object. Because it's actually possible in Java to have such a situation, right? For example, maybe we want to capture the bank details of an employee. We want to capture the bank details of an employee. You can actually create an account. A class which is called maybe account or maybe bank details. Then that class will be having its own attribute. Because when you are capturing the bank details, you need to know maybe the account number, the branch code, the what else? Account number, branch code, maybe name of branch, and maybe type of account, right? So as you can see, this is maybe an attribute of an employee bank details, but this attribute is its own attributes. So the best way would be to create a class which you can maybe call bank details, right? Then you define these You define these attributes, and then you pass it You pass it to employee class as As an argument by instantiating the bank details bank details class. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce higher date here. Right. Higher date. This is not supposed to be a double. We want to use local date. We want to use local date. Local date is not in the standard Java LNG package, so I'm going to import I'm going to import it. Right. Then after doing this, I might just need to go ahead and modify my constructor. I now need to go and modify my constructors rather, because I have two constructors here. Right, so I want to include this new attribute that I've just added. Right, so I can just say higher date is equal to what? We want to give it maybe the current date. What should we write here? Local date dot now. We just want to give it the current date, right? Then here, so I think we are done with this This no arguments constructor or default constructor. Let's move on to the other constructor. Here what we now need to do is we now need to modify it in such a way that when you are instantiating the employee class, you add a local a higher date. You add a higher date. Right. There are two approaches that you can actually use here. There are two approaches that you can use. You can either pass three arguments. You can either pass three arguments, the year, month, and year, month, and day. Here, you can pass three arguments, year, month, and day. Or you can just then inside here. So what I'm saying, let me just quickly do that. I can say int year, comma int month, comma int day. So I've introduced those three arguments. So in the constructor, I then create an object. I then create an object here using those values. So what I can do is I can simply say this dot higher date is equal to what? Local date, sorry, local date dot of, then you pass those three arguments, year, month, and what? And day, like that. So this is one approach. Or you can actually have a constructor. Let me maybe repeat that constructor here, right? But as you can see here, it's already underlined in what? In red, because you are not allowed to define a method, two or more methods with the same name and same argument list. So what I'm going to do is instead of having what? Instead of having this, what I can do is I can actually say comma, then local what? Local date here, right? Then I declare a variable, maybe higher date, right? Maybe to follow that convention of just maybe prefixing each local variable with a, and then I capitalize the first word, I end up with something like that. Then here, what am I supposed to do? I simply what? I simply have to put a what? Higher date here. Right, like that. So that's another what? That's another constructor. So I now have three constructors. And now we have three constructors. The only difference would be in how these constructors are what are invoked or called. Here, as you can see, we are already having an error because it's expecting what? It's expecting to have a constructor with either three arguments or either three arguments or what, or five arguments, right? So here I can actually put what? The integer here, month, right? Then I can put what? A day, like that, right? We no longer have that what? That error. Or is there any other place where I'm instantiating the employee class? Or maybe I can use the other one, the other constructor. So this is the first word constructor, which takes three arguments, a year, month, and what? And day, right? If I want to invoke the other one, I need to create a date first. If I want to invoke the other one, I need to create a date first. Maybe from here, I can actually say local what? Local date. Maybe D is equal to local date. Dot what? Of. Then I specify the date here, whatever date I want to use. Maybe 2016, maybe 9, maybe 23. Right, that's a date. Right, then when I now invoke the constructor, or I create the object, this is what I have to do. I'm maybe going to call this E4. Then I pass what? Let me just take these details and then maybe just change the date. Right. Then I pass what? I now pass D as an argument, like that. Like that. So this is how these two constructors would be what would be invoked. You can do that, or you can do that. So if you do this, it will just check the types of what? Types of actual parameters that we have. The actual types. So here we are having something like this. That's what it will just check. Let me maybe just add a comment here. So it will just check for something like this in the what? In the employee class. Something like string, comma, double, comma, local date. So it will just check for a constructor what? Constructor in which we have a string argument, double, and then what? And then a local date. But for the other one, it will check for a constructor with a string, double, and three integers. Right? So we are saying here, depending with the arguments that you pass here, it will then call the appropriate what? The appropriate constructor. But this takes place at what? Compilation time. Right, so we now want to introduce the concept of what? Of inheritance. We now want to introduce the concept of inheritance. Let me maybe just quickly go back to that file. So here we are saying that inheritance provides a mechanism for new classes to use the data and methods of our existing classes. For example, if a manager is an object with a name, a salary, a hire date, and a secretary name, right? So we are saying we have another class here, manager, right? So we are saying a manager is a name, salary, hire date, and a secretary. So we want to capture the name of the secretary. If you look at an employee is a name, salary, and what? Hire date. And we are saying a manager, in addition to maybe being an employee, they have what? They have got a secretary, and we just need to capture the name of what? The name of the secretary. Right? So how do we modify our what? How do we modify our class to take into account that maybe change? So we are saying then class manager can inherit the name, hire date, and salary from our employee class, and just add a new private field for the secretary name. Inheritance is effected using the keyword extends, and this is what you have to want. This is what you have to do. Just need to use the keyword what extend. So we are saying class manager will inherit all the what data and methods from employee. The existing classes are termed the superclass, base class. This is just a repetition, right? So let me maybe just quickly modify our classes, right? So here, since we are now introducing a new class, which is a subclass of the employee class, I don't think I still have that class diagram. I doubt if I saved the diagram. Right, but we could have maybe just extended that that diagram to just show that relationship between what? Between the employee class and a manager and a manager class. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to introduce another class here, and I'm going to call it what? I'm going to call it manager, right? Right, if you are using Eclipse or NetBeans, at times you may not need to redefine the constructors, you may not need to maybe manually add the getter methods, the setter methods, and so on. But I'm going to do it manually so that maybe you understand the concepts. But in practice, there's no point in doing something manually when you can actually maybe just click on. So here it's actually saying you can actually come up with constructors from super classes, right? And then inherited abstract classes. Is there any abstract classes? So I'm not going to check these boxes, and this is not supposed to have a main method. The main method is in manager test. That's where we are going to be instantiating all these classes from, and then then we test the methods, right? So I now have that class. So what we are saying is that we need to add one private field, secretary name, right, like that. Then after that, we need to modify our constructors. We need to modify our constructors, because now what we want to do is when we create a manager object, we should be able to pass what? To pass the name. We should be able to pass the salary, hire date, and name of secretary as arguments. But if you look at the employee constructor, it doesn't allow us to create what? To create manager objects. Because a manager is an additional what? An additional field, the secretary name. So we start with the default constructor. Maybe before that, I need to indicate that this is a subclass of what? A subclass of employee class by simply saying extends employee. So this basically means that the manager class that we are defining is a subclass of the employee class. So this is how you indicate that one class is a subclass of what? Of another class, right? Then here I now need to introduce my constructors, public. Then I use the name of what? Name of the class, which is manager, right? The no arguments are constructor. We will not take any arguments, right? But what we need to do here is we need to invoke the constructor which is defined in the superclass, right? So how do you do that? You use the keyword super, like that. And then after that, we need to introduce additional fields which have been introduced in the manager class. So if we say super like this in a constructor, it is going to invoke the no args constructor which is in the superclass employee. So that no args constructor which is in the superclass employee, what it simply does is it will allow you to what? It will allow you to introduce to initialize the name to what? To that, salary to that, and local and the hire date to what? To that. So it is going to invoke. So we are now reusing existing functionality by simply calling it. We don't need to redefine those what? Those variables. By the fact that we are extending what? We are extending employee. We can actually what? We can actually have access to the attributes, the name, salary, and what, but we are not going to be accessing them from this file. But they are sort of available. They are part of this class, this class manager that we are defining. So this class that we are defining manager, it actually has those attributes which are in what? In the superclass employee, even though they are private, because we can't access them from what? From because if I try to say maybe employee dot what were some of the methods which are, but they were not what? They were not even static, so we can't call them using this. But if we were maybe to create an object, we could have maybe try to access some of the methods. As you can see, these are some of the methods which are there, but we can't find what? We can't find any of the what? Any of the private instance variables. We can't find the private instance variables here, right? Because they are private. But this class that we are defining manager, since it's extending employee, it acquires the state and behavior of what? Of employee. So this manager is a name, salary, and what? And hire date, which it is inheriting from the superclass employee. So we now need to only what? Initialize this here. Just need to initialize the secretary name. This is a string, so we can just use a space like that, right? Then we now need to have what? We now need to have the other what? Other constructor. We now need to have the other constructor, right? So the other one is public manager, right? Then I am going to copy the what? I am going to copy these variables. Just copy these variables, and then you just come and paste them there like that. Or you can define other variables as long as the number of arguments which are here correspond to the number of arguments which are in the other other constructor, because we are going to use them when we are invoking our superclass constructor, right? So what I'm now going to do is so these variables which maybe are related to variables which are coming from the superclass. So what I now need to do is to add the secretary name here. I just add the secretary name, which is a string. Then maybe a secretary. A secretary name like that. Right? Then here, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to call super. Right? When I call super, I just have to add these arguments. I just need to add these arguments, so I need to remove the data types. Like this. Right, then I initialize this variable. I'm going to copy that and then I paste what? I paste it there. Oh, sorry. I've pasted the wrong thing. Is secretary name like this. So we are now supposed to have something like what? Like that. Or let me maybe just hit enter there so that you can see the complete code on one screen. Right. So this is the keyword super that we are using to invoke the superclass what? Constructor. So what we just need to do is to pass what? To pass arguments which correspond to what? To the formal parameters which are in the superclass what? Superclass constructor. Right? Then after that we initialize this additional variable that we are introducing in this in this class. So here what is important is to make sure that the order of these variables, they correspond to the order of the variables which are in the superclass. So the superclass starts with a string followed by a double, then 3 integers. Right? So here you just need to make sure that we are sort of just calling a method here. When you are calling a method, you just need to make sure that the order of formal parameters corresponds to the order of what? Of actual parameters. Just need to make sure that the order of actual parameters corresponds to the order of formal parameters. Only here. Here you can actually change the order. And maybe start with secretary name, start with double and salary or whatever. But what I prefer is to maybe just maintain that order, because it makes it easy for you to maybe instantiate your classes. So we are saying maybe when we are instantiating a manager class, we start by the attributes which are maybe coming from employee. But here you can use any other order. But maybe it's better to maybe just follow the order of attributes which are coming from Coming from the superclass. Right. Then after this, let me maybe just quickly add that other constructor, because we had 3 constructors. So here what I'm going to do is just add local. I'm supposed to have local date here. Then I did a hire date, then a string like that. We need to import what? Import local date. So I import local date. Let me again, maybe I hit enter here so that you can see the complete code. Then here what I just need to do is to what? Is to now pass what? Now pass this a higher date. I pass it as an argument there. Like that. Then I initialize that variable. So I'm done with my what? My constructors. I'm done with my constructors. The other thing that I want to maybe emphasize is that this call to the superclass constructor should be the first statement. It is supposed to be the first statement in your what? In your method. You are not allowed to maybe edit after some what? After some statements like this. As you can now see, I'm now getting what? I'm now getting an error. The error message is a constructor call must be first statement in a constructor. Constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. Right? So this is how you want. This is how you define your constructors. So now I can now go to test to the test bed employee test, and then what? And then create a manager object. I can come here and then I say manager M. Right, manager M is equal to new. Sorry. Manager. Right, then I pass maybe some arguments. I'm going to copy these arguments, and then just add the what? Add the name of the secretary. Right, then after local date, higher date, I just add maybe a name of the secretary. Right, like that. So I now have a manager object. Right, with this manager object, I can invoke any public method which is defined in the superclass employee. For example, let me just go and check the methods that I have in that class. I have got a getName method which is defined in the superclass. I don't need to redefine a getName method in the subclass manager because it's already defined. I can just call it. Right, so that's what I'm going to do. I can simply say here, M, which is our object, M dot get name. Right, I think I have too many brackets there. M dot get what? Let me maybe delete some of these statements. Oh, I have also deleted the D. I need that D because I'm using it here. But all these other statements, I no longer need them. Right. So here I'm calling the what? I'm calling the getName method using the manager object. But if I go to the manager class, there is no any what? Any getName method which is defined. The fact that manager is extending what? Is extending employee. Makes all these what? Public methods available or visible. We can actually access them and what? And use them. If I run here, I will actually get what? Get the name of what? The name of the manager. I can get the name of the manager. Right? So I can call all the methods which are what? Which are defined in the superclass. As long as they are public, I can call them using a manager object. This is the concept of inheritance. It's the concept of what? Of inheritance. Right. So here I am just extending my employee class. I don't need to modify the employee class. When I add what? When I add subclasses. I don't have to modify the employee class when I add subclasses. They are just going to acquire what? Acquire features. But we then have maybe a problem. If we try to call a method like, I think we had added methods to read, what were we reading? The details of an employee through the keyboard. If we call the change salary method, it works without any problem. But if we call this read method, if we call the read method, we have maybe a problem. But the problem is that the method will allow us to read only the name, salary, and hire date. We will not be able to read what? To read the name of what? Secretary. So if we do this, if we try to call the either S read or what, or B read from employee test. Let's say maybe we say M dot B read, like that. So like I am saying, you can only enter what? Enter the name, right? Then after entering the name, you can enter the salary. Then after that, initially it was only what I've just introduced another field today, the local date. But from the way that we defined it, we could only enter the name and salary, right? But we need to just call the one which is in the superclass, which is allowing us to enter the name and salary. We have to modify it first in the employee class so that it allows us to accept the hire date. We have to modify it from the employee class side that it allows us to accept the hire date. Then after that, if we now go to manager class, we should be able to first call the method which is in the superclass, the read or S read, and then we just read what? The name of the secretary. So we are now overriding. So we can actually come here. And then we define a method, public. But when we are overriding, we need to make sure that we define it in exactly the same way it is defined in the that is the header. It's supposed to be exactly the same, right? Like that. So we then just paste it there, the header only. Then after that, right, we are trying to override a method which is in the superclass, right? So we define a method in the subclass with the same signature as the method which is in the superclass, right? Then here, the first thing that we need to do is we just need to call the one which is in the superclass. So we use the keyword super dot. Then we call what? The S read method, which is in the superclass, right? Like that. Then after calling it, we then read the what? We then read the name of the secretary. We read the name of the secretary. So here we need to say maybe a scanner, new, scanner. Then we declare a variable maybe like S, new scanner, system in, right? Then we import scanner. Right after importing scanner, we can now say have a prompt system.out.println enter name of secretary, like that. Right after that prompt, we read the name of the secretary, and then we assign it to this dot secretary is equal to s dot this is next line. Right, we are done. So here we are invoking what? The method which is in the superclass using the keyword super. Right, then after that we just read the additional fields. Is that a question? Yes.
Can you use the scanner also being super in the super?
The one which is already in the superclass. That is sort of maybe private. Unless we are to, but it would not be a good idea to give it public scope. Because the scanner, we defined it inside a method. You can't access maybe the private details, which are inside what? Inside a method. But if we had done this, which I don't recommend, if we had maybe declared a scanner here, maybe like a public scanner, public scanner, maybe S is equal to new scanner, then system.in. System.in, like that. Then we maybe comment out this, right? We can use that scanner. If we come to this, we should be able to use that scanner without redefining it. If it's public or protected, you can also use protected here. Protected. That's the correct spelling. You can also access it if it is protected. Well, maybe we can do that. There's no any problem, especially if it is maybe the scanner. Maybe we can do that. Or we can come and redefine it from here. Are there any other questions? Yes? In terms of efficiency, it might maybe have a bearing on what efficiency of your programs. Because each and every time you import a class, that will then be loaded in memory when the program is what is running. So if you minimize the number of classes that you are importing, that might improve the efficiency of your programs. To improve, definitely it improves the efficiency of your programs. That is the reason why maybe if you are using, I think we are all familiar with PHP. We have got maybe those require ones and require functions. You don't want to require or include a file several times. It has an effect on the efficiency of your programs. So when this program is actually compiling, what happens is that you have to go and check for the source code of these files. And then that will be included in your source program. Then it's loaded in memory. If I just click here on a scanner, this is the source this is the source code for scanner. So you can do this using either Eclipse or NetBeans. If you just hold down Control and then you click on a class, you actually get the source code. Yes. It is up class manager. Cannot.
Create in a class.
What would be the relationship between this class and employee and manager?
Creating a class to call the constructor, the manager.
What is the relationship between this class that you are introducing and manager? Is there any relationship? Is it a subclass or? Java doesn't directly support multiple inheritance. We'll talk about that. You can only try to implement multiple inheritance through interfaces. Yes. Shh, shh. On the subclass, no. No, you can't. Like what we had here before, if I do this, right, and then I delete that, right, then I come to this file. Sorry, it's supposed to be manager. Then I come to this file, and then maybe I comment out this, right, right. So as you can see here, it can't find scanner. I think that's maybe one thing that the designers of the language might need to maybe look at, maybe try to maybe improve, because it doesn't maybe make much sense to re-import something that you have maybe imported in the superclass. They're in the same ingredient. They're in the same package. Unless I didn't, they're in the same package.